Hello everyone, welcome back to Shimmerwolf Arts. Today I'm going to be doing a little walkthrough / speed paint of one of my pieces of art. As you can see, the character on the left is Phineas Flynn from Phineas and Ferb, and the character on the left is actually a Disky from the Bolt video game, Bolt being the little white dog with the lightning bolt on his side who thinks the powers are real. There's a video game based on the movie, and this is the scenario that Phineas is in. He is inside that video game. So the environment behind him and the Disky are from the video game. And short disclaimer, Phineas belongs to Dan Povenmire and Just Swampy Marsh, and the environment that he's in and the Disky behind him are owned by Disney. But I'm going to be doing a quick walkthrough of how my process works. Mainly, I'm going to be showing you how I line as well as color and shade based where Phineas is going to be. So this is going to be my process as to how I color and line when it comes to my art. So hope you guys enjoy. Okay, so this is my process of lining. As you can see, I have a sketch that I'm basing everything off of. So that's literally what I'm doing. When I line, I often like to work in multiple different layers, just so that if I do want to do like one single line, it helps me to not pretty much mess it up all the time. So I will work in multiple layers just when I'm doing line art, and then once I'm finished with the line art, I will end up merging the layers after I'm done. And I usually color my lines, but I save that until very last. Just because if I keep the lines black, I can see a little bit better where I'm coloring stuff in. And so I keep my lines black until I'm completely done. And then after I'm done coloring and shading and all that stuff, then I will use the black to pick a color from the current line art, and then I will color the line art from there. So this is basically the process of me tracing over the lines I've already made, because I actually drew this traditionally. I drew this on paper. And so I drew it on paper first, and then I inked it just so that my pencil marks wouldn't smear. So I lined it, and now I'm going over the lines again digitally. And so technically I am tracing, but I'm tracing over my own lines. So yeah, I'm almost done with the line art, and so next will come the color, or at least the color of the skin, because I do my coloring in different stages. And so the line art's pretty much done now, so we're going to move on to the color next. Okay, so the line art is basically complete. Now we're going to move on to the coloring aspect. I normally would choose a color that is pretty much as close to the skin color as I normally could get, but for this I did experiment a little bit and used a color that would not have to be edited later on. So I used like a darker, slightly more purplish color for the skin, and as you can see I'm looking at different little references for that. And for this skin tone, because the lighting is obviously not like typical yellow light, that's why I'm using a different color for the skin at this point. And as you can also see, I color over some of the lines, and that's because I use multiple layers when it comes to my coloring. I have different folders for like different aspects. I have different folders for like the skin, the eyes, the hair, and stuff like that. So I feel I can color over some of the lines. And yeah, I'm editing the color a little bit more. I'm making it actually a little bit more yellow. And then little freckles there. Here we go. Now I'm getting into the shading. So for the shading, I base it off the color, the light is. And so the light is very yellowish, and so I'm using a purple for the shading. And I basically do pillow shading for the skin, but it's not all pillow shading. As you can see, some of it is still sharp lines, like especially like for like shadows based from clothes and stuff like that. I will make the shading a little bit less pillowy, but I try to shade like skin like as realistically as I can. And so I'm still using that purplish color, and I start when I shade, I use like a cell kind of style first, and to basically show like where my shadows are going to be, and then I'll blur it. So I started with the cell shading, and then I started blurring it. And I don't blur it completely all the time. It'll just depend on where I'm at and what I'm doing with the shading. And so that's basically the process of my shading. So now I'm quickly coloring in the teeth, making them obviously not white so that I can show the emphasis of how the lighting is in the environment. I don't know why I had the shading all the way right there. Oh yeah, now I see why. It's so I could add where the shading was. Yeah, sometimes I'll add a little squiggle if I want to extend some of the shading out, but not have to completely blur it. So now we're going to work on the highlights. And because the light is very yellow, very kind of muddy kind of color almost, that's what the color I used for the highlighting. And for the highlighting, I will never have it at 100% just because it'll look extremely bright when I highlight. So I never use 100% opacity for the lighting. I have it oftentimes I have it around half opacity because it's just so it'll still glow, but it won't be overbearingly glowy. So now I'm going to do the eyes. So again, just like with the coloring of the head and the skin, I used the bucket here because I was lazy. But I colored in the eyes, and then I'm going to quickly shade them. And with Sai, I have my little color picker on the side there with the little blurs of where my colors are, just so that I don't have to recreate them every single time. So the highlights again. For the eyes, I didn't blur them just because when things are moist, they don't have exactly a whole bunch of blurred shading. And so then here are the eyes. And normally when I do like a cartoony style, I add a pupil. But okay, yeah, I do add a pupil right there. And it's just because his irises are so small to have emphasis the shock. I normally just don't add a pupil, but I decided to here anyway. Okay, so now I'm going to be doing the hair. As you can see, I'm trying to make the color as accurate towards the lighting as I possibly can. And unfortunately, because his hair is red, it was definitely a little harder for me to find that good color for the hair. And so you'll see a lot of different colors being used when it comes to just coloring in the hair. I think I stick with, I experiment with a couple of them, and then I think I just stick with one. So now, then I move on to the eyebrows, and I just start coloring the eyebrows too because they're included with the hair and they are in fact the same color as his hair. So now I'm ready to shade, and I do multiple layers of shading. So I use the same purplish kind of color, and what I'm doing, I use the marker tool when I do hair, and I pretty much put shading where it would be like at the darkest points. And so that's how I do. And so once I get the base layer of the shading down, then I will very quickly move on and do a second layer of shading, and I will keep the layers on multiply. And when I do that, the layers underneath them actually become darker. So that's how I add like multiple different layers of shading, is because I do have the multiply layers in order for the shading to look pretty cool. And now I'm doing the highlights, and I'm using the same color, but again, I think I'm using a screen layer on this. I'm using either a screen or just I'm not using a low opacity shine layer because it's obviously not doing that. But now I add a little bit of pillow shading just to emphasize that 3D shape and to make some of the shading darker. But yeah, then I do the same thing on the shine layer, and this time I actually did use a shine layer and I didn't make it extremely, I didn't actually change the opacity, but that's how I did that. So now his head, his skin, and his eyes are now finished. So now I'm going to be moving on to the clothes. I already skipped the coloring of the wheel bar, and so I'm just going to be doing the clothes in this shot here. So I outline everything first instead of like using a bucket because I don't want to have to go over all of the lines. I have to anyway, but when I do this, it makes it a lot easier if I just do the outlines first. And here I'm just coloring it in because the bucket tool isn't completely accurate and it won't color in every single thing. So just like with the skin and the hair, I shade it, but because it is in fact fabric, I am doing a little bit different technique, and I'm not going to be super blurring everything. Some of it I will, just for that added effect of 3D-ness, but right here, see, I'm adding like the different folds in the fabric. And because it is a cartoon, it's a little harder to do that, but it's not impossible to do. And then I add a little bit of texture to make it look like it's, actually fabric. And then I add the shine just like before, just like that. Then I add a little bit of extra shading that the jacket would cause. So now I'm going to do the shoes briefly. And I do use a different color for the shoes compared to the pants, just to make it look a little bit different. And then of course I use the same white that I use for the eyes just because it doesn't really matter because it is a cartoon and they often use the same colors anyway for different things. And so I'm using the same white that I used for the eyes. And so I color the shoes and then I shade the shoes just like before. With the shoes, I can do a little bit of pillow shading because we can probably guess that his shoes are made of rubber, and rubber is pretty flexible and pretty shiny at that, so we can use I used a little bit of pillow shading for the shoes. So now moving on to the jacket. Again, I'm not using the exact same color as the orange stripe on his shirt that would normally have just because of the lighting in the environment. So I'm using a little bit more yellowish color, and then I'm making it just a slight bit darker. So you can still tell what color it actually is, but you can tell it's been muted a little bit from the lighting. And so that's all colored in. And now I start shading it. It's like I said, I use a little bit of pillow shading here. And I try to add a little bit of clothing wrinkles in the shirt. Because it is a cartoon, it's a little harder to do that. If you want to try to shade real fabric realistically, it's harder to do that in a cartoon scenario because the clothing is so simple. But yeah, I experiment a little bit with the different stretching of fabric right here. And of course the shine that I add. And I have to color in the little zipper thing too. I literally almost forgot to do that when I colored it in the first time. So I was like, oh no, I need to actually color in this. So I did. I colored it. Now I'm going to color in the scarf. The scarf originally is like a cream-ish kind of color. Yeah, I noticed I messed up on the coloring. I thought I was coloring outside the line on the scarf, but turns out the scarf was not actually where it was supposed to be. So I colored outside the lines. So I had to erase it. And so the scarf is kind of like a cream kind of color. And so that's what I put a darker, slightly more muted cream color on the scarf. The scarf I kind of went I could go a little bit more in depth with the shading just because it is a more wispy kind of fabric. And so I could do a little bit more experimenting with the shading on that. And so then, of course, adding the shine on the scarf. I don't add a ton of shine, but other than that. So now I'm getting to the line art coloring because I'm done coloring him. I can actually go back over and color the lines now. And so what I normally do when I color the lines, I get pretty much as close to the shaded area as I can where the black is, and then I pretty much pick a color that's darker than the actual shaded area. For this, I added a little bit of red to it just so that it looked a little bit more like skin color. And then the shading obviously looked more like shading. And so I'm coloring in the jacket now. Like I said, I color the lines with I add a little bit more color to the actual lines in comparison to where the black would add to it, just to make it pop a little bit more. And so I'm just coloring the lines at this point. So there you go, guys. That is the process by which I colored and lined and then colored Phineas in this drawing. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'm sorry for the lack of music. I got a copyright claim on one of my videos, or actually on my live stream, after I literally said, I don't own any of his music, disclaimer, ha ha ha. But nah, YouTube bots still decided to be like, oh no, your copyright claim, ha. So that's why there's no music. I'm not gonna risk anything, especially since I'm doing fan art. I don't want to have like people go like, oh, copyright claim, you're drawing characters that aren't yours, blah. So I'm keeping it safe. The music is, there's not gonna be any music in this video. So sorry about that, but hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.